Welcome to Just in Our Minds. Welcome back. So this is Dr. Brent Anderson. He has a PhD in physical therapy. He's an author. He's a movement aficionado. He has a very deep background in movement in general. So I'm really excited to talk with him today. And he's also a pioneer for Pilates. So I'll welcome in.
Thank you so much.
And
I love that just in mind. That's
yeah, Just in Our Minds. It's a
just in
play on my
minds.
name too.
Yes,
You know,
I love
we
it.
got to get out of our minds.
I
That's
figured that out. I was like, that's good.
Yeah, I was trying to create a name for like a podcast, and it turned into my LLC and everything else too.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we all, as coaches and things like that, we all have probably a healer archetype. So that's where I'd like to start. Like,
Sure.
where'd your healer archetype start?
Oh my goodness. Probably from my mother. I mean, I think that it was just, we were a family of 5 and I was number 4. And between mom and grandma, they were both very nurturing. And I just realized, like, when I started dancing, for example, I was 15 years old. And some reason I was always the one that the dancers would come to get a massage or to try to fix something. I just sort of knew. And then track and field, the same thing. And I just always had this, I guess, compassion for, seeing somebody hurt.
Yeah, and then that aura too, probably the inviting. Yeah. That's a thing too, because I feel like there's some good coaches out there, but there's just something off that people don't.
There is something that is innate of that connection, and you think, even if we think, for example, the autism spectrum, and something we've discovered more and more about in the last 10, 15 years, but realizing how you sense other people's needs. And so in a world where we tend to be a little more external locus of control, like we tend to blame other people for our mishaps or for our challenges or events that caused our challenges. And when you have an internal locus of control, there's a certain level of confidence of who you are that allows you just to be present. And I think it can be learned. To be present is to feel what's happening around you. And with that internal locus of control comes the, I guess you could, like, a word that comes to my mind is ethnocentricity, which means that you see the world through your moral compass, right? And if you make all the judgments based on your individual compass, you're probably going to misjudge people.
Oh,
Right?
100%.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And where if you can identify your internal biases, right? So it's like, this is me. I'm a white male. I have this experience. I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was educated this way. Those are my internal biases of how I see the world. So the minute that I can identify that, and this is what we teach to the physical therapy students, is when you can identify your internal bias, then you can be present for your patient or for your client to be able to learn what they feel, what they believe, what's going on in their mind, what's going on in their body, without you biasing it.
Yeah, it's like and that's something I see too, because they only see sometimes people, not just physical therapists in general, they only see a symptom, or they can only
Treat it apart.
It's like the same, prescribe or whatever you want to call it, or like people that want to talk to you or talk at you, and they're already thinking about the thing that they're trying to say next. And I feel like it's like that across the board,
which
in a
is
lot of ways.
typical in medicine today, isn't it? Like, we realize this as being a serious challenge inside the medical world. And we've created the environment where the time we have to spend with the patient is so limited that we're going to come in authoritatively based on your test and tell you what's wrong with you, which is completely backwards, right? And so I have a mentor of mine, Dr. Carol Davis, and she wrote a book called The Interactive Patient. And she has a quote that I love. It was like, we believe that the patient or the client knows what's wrong with them and what they need. They just don't know how to articulate it. So it's our job to help them articulate it, to listen to them. And that's a much more powerful position in healing than it is just coming in acting like you know everything and being authoritative, talking down to the patient. I have a cute story on that. I had to have a hip replaced from old injuries, and I was investigating everybody. Like, I traveled up to Chicago to see Dr. Berger. I traveled up to New York to see some of the doctors up there that were famous, and I ended up going to see, and I knew what I wanted. I wanted somebody that was trained in a very specific technique, using a very specific table, using robotic intervention, accompanying it. I knew what I wanted, but I wanted to find the right doctor. And so I had made an appointment with somebody local that was the chief of total joint replacements in Miami at the Baptist Hospital there. And when I sat down with him, he had the films up on the wall, and he sat down next to me, not over me. And he said, "You might not know this, but my wife went through your Pilates training and is a certified Polestar Pilates teacher." And I said, "Oh." So I said, "That's fantastic. I think I remember her." And as we were talking there, he was asking me, knowing that I was a doctor of physical therapy, what do you see in the film? And when do you believe it's necessary to get the hip replaced? And I said, I want to have whole body health. And I don't want to have a bunch of different metal parts in my body. So that's my deterrence. And he said, he goes, "I've listened to your lectures for the last 2 years that my wife listens to at nights. And I remember you saying something," he's quoting me, "I remember you saying something about whole body health is whole body function, not parts." And it was like the click right there. And I said, "You're doing my surgery tomorrow. Let's do it.
Let's do it." Yeah,
And
you
it was
understand.
wonderful, very successful.
That's great.
But it was like him taking the extra, everybody else was like, "Brent, you're bone on bone. You need a total hip replacement. I'm your doctor. We're going to do this technique." And I'm like, "I just don't know that you're really my doctor."
Yeah, it's the intention that he put into it, and he understands you on a
Dr. Juan
metaphysical level.
Suarez sat down next to me and talked to me and didn't make the judgment call. He let me make the judgment call.
And he basically, and then on that scale too, he sees the bigger picture. It's like, how much longer can you do
this? And I had
this?
trust. I had trusted my caregiver, which is a really important thing.
It's hard too when you have those injuries and you try to do everything holistically. Eventually, then everything else, you get it. Your fascial tissue, everything's guarding that area.
Everything.
And it turns into that
mentally,
spider web.
spiritually, physically, structurally.
100%. And then how have you felt since then?
That was a very successful surgery. You sort of kick yourself for waiting so long. Like I had dislocated the hip from a pole vaulting accident in college. So you got to think, I'm dealing with hip pain for 20 plus years. I had an arthroscopic procedure in 2000, which was one of the first procedures when they started going into the hip arthroscopically. And then I went another almost 20 years, 18 years of just always being in pain, and what led to some back pathology as well, because I couldn't get full hip extension. The labrum was torn, and it was just wear and tear. You'd hear it grinding at times if I wanted to go do certain activities.
And pole vaulting too, so dominant on one side, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, and I always joke about it, but it's like when you fall down from 16 feet and you miss the pit and you hit a cement curb. You're gonna have and that happens. You talk to any pole vaulter that pole vaulted enough years, they're gonna have those accidents.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Same thing with jiu-jitsu. Like
Jiu-jitsu,
you're gonna come across those.
Some of my biggest injuries were probably skateboarding for so long. I was sponsored. Like I did, like not big sponsorships, but did pretty good when I was like 12, 13, 14.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we all have that different timeline of my dad said, for you, probably your generation, because I'll be 37, but my dad told me one time, he was like, you're the last generation of metal jungle gyms, so like that chaos that I feel like it's coming back around. I think like it's more of a bell curve with these electric bikes and different things. The kids are starting to be dangerous again.
I think the adults are also realizing that there is greater risk, in them not being outside. And, we sort of had an unspoken rule that when the kids would come home from school, it's like we're fortunate in Miami to live on almost an acre. And it was like, go out and go swimming, jump off the roof into the pool, climb trees, play soccer, rollerblade, play basketball. You're not coming in the house unless a bone's sticking through your flesh.
Yep. Or the lights turn on.
Or the lights, exactly. So, it was like, I think parents of your generation are realizing that, we can't, well, definitely with the digital age of the smartphone, like we have to control the amount that your generation's kids are having with that. And the answer is doing the kind of activities you love to play in, like go out and skateboard.
Yeah.
Go out and go hiking. And go out and go running.
And I think that's the awesome bell curve. It's like you don't want to be like your parents. And if you see everybody sitting around watching Netflix or iPads or cell phones, they're like, we want to go back outside. And then they start looking at somebody down the line created trends to start dressing like the 90s and 2000s again. Then what do? They look into what that is, and they're like, oh, that's skateboarding and this and that. And
that's right.
So then they pick that back up again. And I think that's where that's
so I had a conversation with another fellow physical therapist professor, and we were in a webinar talking about the health of the next generation, so Gen Z, and talking about some of the challenges, emotional and mental challenges that we're seeing really escalate in this population. And he made a statement. He says, I have complete confidence that, Gen X and millennials are going to find solutions with the Gen Zers of how to balance that back out. And I thought, you know what, that's such, and I think of my children and my grandchildren, and I think like, yeah, I see that. I see your generation, especially thought leaders like yourself, Justin, where it's like movement, like let's go outside and move. Let's wrestle again. Let's be like the pack, the tribe that, engages in these activities that are so essential, and not just for the physical development. I mean, a lot of times we keep thinking of, oh, I want to be strong and prevent these problems. But man, the emotional and the spiritual and the psychological are way more important for us to be able to socialize and move. And, if you can get a kid to go take dance classes, drama, martial arts, just to deconstructed play. Just like the jungle gym and making a fort and, play and capture the flag.
And I think teaching body awareness, something like gymnastics or wrestling or whatever that is, dance, whatever that version is, and being able to, the way I describe it is being able to move just not in like a 2.5 dimensional space. Because,
That's right.
when I say to a lot of clients and different people, it's like we're 4th dimensional beings in a 3rd dimensional world, but most people only train 2 dimensionally.
That's right.
Up, down, left, right,
like that, yeah.
And then so for that, being able to move and flow and being able to, like, jujitsu is horizontal rock climbing. Like most people don't ever get the chance to run horizontally where their shoulders on the ground. And with jiu-jitsu, you have to be able to do that. Same with dance or pole vaulting or anything like that. It's just a different dynamic. So you're playing with a different dimension of space.
I love watching. We were this week, our granddaughter, Alina, she's 7, and rock climbing with her mom and dad, and watching them explore and try to figure out how to, use the leg when something that looks like it should just be an arm pull, but you got to preserve that energy in the arm. Or, Charlie, I know you guys do jiu-jitsu together, but it's like the quality of that expression is so powerful in your nervous system, your fascial system. And, just think of it. I'm sure you could give countless examples of how your perception of the world has changed by having these types of movement experiences.
Oh, 100%. And missing it in general. Like for me, I noticed because I count myself as an outside dog. I started blue collar working in a farm town when I was 14. And moving into Utah when I was 22, and the further I get along the line, I move over towards making, try to make more money for less time. But then I started noticing more depression. I would isolate myself more, and I realized I'm like, oh man, you're not a labradoodle. You're like a hybrid wolf or whatever that is, and you keep putting yourself in these 90-degree areas. Yeah. And I think it's I heard this, and I've been talking about it a couple times, but like the difference between sometimes with like the blue collar worker and the white collar worker is the white collar worker doesn't have a good relationship with danger. And so like blue collar workers or first responders or MMA practitioners, or for yourself, Pilates, dancing, anything like that, pole vaulting, you have this sense of danger. and a respect for it that a lot of people never experience. And that's why I think they have so much more fear.
And it sets that clock, right? So it's like you think of people that are experiencing crazy levels of anxiety, and there's nothing dangerous in their life that we see from the outside.
Yeah, and what happens? And they're watching these fear-based, like murder mysteries. Their cortisol levels are highly elevated in the morning. Everybody's dehydrated, and then they're just sipping coffee, and
And I think we're going to see a lot more of the research showing things like, where you see the extreme ice bath, or holding your breath underwater, or the breathing techniques, or extreme heat, or height, going up on top of really high heights, or jumping out of airplanes. It's like how do we regulate that autonomic system, right? The sympathetic system. How do we regulate that to be more accurate of what really represents danger to the human versus this artificial perception that we've created of danger? And so people are having, physical and physiological responses in a digital world that do not correlate with what real danger is. And I think you're right in that sense. Like I think of, my family also was all blue collar. Not hardly anybody graduated from high school. Dad and uncle were police officers. Mother was a secretary. My grandmother was a candy striper, they called in the hospital, that would be like a CNA today, that would go around and clean the poop pots and those kind of thing, very low end, just trying to bring enough money in to put food on the table for us, to make it possible for us. And so
back when it was still everybody's providing as much as possible.
And I remember, Justin, there were nights where, Dad knew he was being called to chase the Hells Angels across the border, and which would be very dangerous back in the 60s, you could imagine, without the communication or the technology we have today. But I remember being there in legitimate fear. And I remember one time my father's partner one of his partners was shot and killed. He pulled somebody over. They just robbed a bank. They were trying to get across the border. He came up like normal. And it was somebody that studied with my dad. I remember him being depressed for months because he felt like it was his fault. But that was real danger.
Yeah, and I don't know your dad apparently, but that side of like masculinity too, from a first responder standpoint, it's so hard because they have so many really hard situations they see daily. The compression and compartmentalization on that so hard. I'm sure like it takes a real person to be able to, and then you just see the tail end of that, right? Or the full.
Yeah, you have, and he was adamant that none of us would become law enforcement, and so he, was very adamant about the fact that it's just like, these things are changing. He and his twin brother were on an adrenaline rush their whole life.
Me too. I'm glad that's why I kind of got myself, and like I'm finding a better balance of that. It's not like
and I was like that, but from a different way. Like I was pole vaulting until I was 47, and I broke my neck. That was when I hung up my shoes. I had to have a 3-level fusion.
Oh, like Charlie was telling me about that. That's like a.
And that really changed my life because it was like up until that point, black diamond skiing and just being involved in like anything that was going up, climbing Half Dome, hanging over the edge, looking down and going like, oh, look at that. It's like that was the kind. I loved jumping off of cliffs. I loved that feel of falling or flying, and hence pole vaulting. And all of a sudden, all of those things were taken away, and it was really a tough time for about 10 years because I just kept seeing the model of aging out, and not being able to see myself participating at the level that I needed to be able to be happy, and then having to find that balance of saying, what, it might be okay that if I can participate in this.
And especially like an injury like that too.
Joy.
Was that like an identity crisis too? Because you lost your whole self a person.
Well, I mean, look at what I do. I fix people that are broken, and here I was broken.
Yeah. It's a whole different. And then all the activities you do.
And you see movies about it, right? You see movies of like the physician that all of a sudden, got this disease or had this injury or
Yeah.
no longer could.
The
was a
Doctor
patient.
Strange.
The doctor
Yeah.
becomes the patient.
Yeah.
And, it's a eye-opening experience of being able to, recapture your identity. Like I remember, and you see this a lot in, you talked a little bit about rescue workers, so firefighters, police officers, military. Their identity is tied to that role. This was something that I've spent a lot of time on, is differentiating the concept of stewardship or a role versus identity, right? So it's like you have the ability, you have a stewardship, Justin, of this podcast. And it might last 2 years, it might last 10 years. Nobody really knows, And it was like, for us, it was looking at, property. You own property and you think this is my property, but it's like, that land has been there for millions of years. It's going to be there for millions more. Like what you really are is a steward of that. Or if you're in a relationship, you're a steward of that relationship with that other person. And that relationship could last 60 years and somebody finally dies, or it could end in divorce or separation. But while you have that stewardship, what do? And is that your identity? And I watched my dad lose his identity when he had to retire from back surgery as a cop, that he no longer could really identify who he was. And I remember thinking and being very conscious. I was in my 30s. I was probably around your age. And thinking like, is my identity tied into being a physical therapist? Is my identity tied into my ministry? Is it tied into my family? Where is my identity sort of hanging out? And I think that that's a wonderful question for anybody to be able to start going through. It's sort of like the Buddhist question, who am I?
Goes back into
what do I
presence.
need? And, what is my purpose? And we've spent a lot of time going through that and realizing that, when you can come up with something, right, that just resonates so deeply with you. Like to me, the word alignment is a powerful word.
Huge. And I always joke around and say, like, I don't believe in coincidences. Everything's divine timing.
Right.
Like today, even,
Yeah.
like getting you in here. And I mean, that's why I love the podcast. It's not just about having my face out there. It's like being able to get stories out there for the individuals that need it. That's what helped me. And that's why I give back to it. If I have a voice that can get out there because people like hearing my voice, same thing with you. That's why I was really excited once Charlie was showing me. I was like, yeah, I'd love to have him in here because I'm a big fan of like Mochi Findo Kraus and the Findo Kraus method and Ido Portal and all these like,
I love Ido Portal.
and David Weck.
Roy Gold. You ever watch Roy? Amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I just salivate. It's like
Yeah.
I'm as straight as could be, but if I was, I would totally go out with
Dude,
Roy Gold.
And it was so funny because I would like early on with calisthenics and stuff like that. I'm like, because I can do handstands. I mean, I have a 68-inch box jump. Like I could do the split. I'm a gifted athlete and using biomechanics, things like that to be able to do things. But then, there's always the 1% and you see that. And if, like for me, I was like, imagine him being tall and trying that. And I didn't realize he's 6'2", and now I don't have anything. It's like, that's your ego. I'm like,
He does have a very long body.
he does.
He does have
Yeah.
a long body
No,
in proportion to his
those
legs.
spinal waves and
Yes.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
him and I don't know if you've seen Trevor and is it Trevor Nash? He does it strength side.
That sounds familiar.
He's a very fluent locomotion guy online.
I
Yeah.
do follow him on Instagram.
Yeah, it's usually YouTube
Anybody
videos and
that's sort of
Instagram. Same.
moving that way, I follow.
I love it.
And Michael Fitch, we talked about with Animal Flow, and I've known Michael for when he first started.
Have you seen Cameron Chain? He a Budokan. Budokan's another version. So he did like a form of Pilates, and he's a black belt, I think, now in jiu-jitsu and at a high level yogi practitioner. So he created this very similar to Animal Flow.
Yeah, it's just movement exploration, right? It's looking at what potential do we have. You think back in the early days of parkour, of just watching some of the things that they would explore within nature and within the buildings and the structures, which was originally, I believe it was like French military that was looking at how to train elite military individuals was the origin of parkour. I could stand corrected on that if it was. But, it's like now watching where it goes and watching, teenage boys and girls learning how to explore that, using props and flying through the air. To me, it's like that's deconstructed play. And there was another time not too long ago where I had the chance to be on a board of directors for a School of Arts for boys. And this was in North Carolina, and it was primarily targeted towards boys of color and disadvantage. And the director of the school had done her master's thesis and realized that, the white children in 7th and 9th grade had a very diverse desire to be, when they grow up, like everything from an astronaut to a plumber, like every possible thing, blue collar work, military, astronauts.
Yeah, mine was
dancers,
NASCAR
all kinds
mechanic.
of things, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then what she noticed in what was the outcome of her thesis was Black and Hispanic boys, 95% of them in North Carolina in the 7th and 9th grade age saw it as sports or music, 95%. And so her goal with this school was to create lots of exposure to different role models. And they asked me to basically create the physical activity component of it. So it was a performing arts school. We put recess in 2 different blocks, 20-minute blocks in the middle of the day. They had an hour of some kind of art, from visual art to performing arts. And then they had sports after school, all different sports that they would play. And we saw these boys go from being diagnosed of ADHD and all of these different things, and very substandard reading levels, to within 3 months, their reading levels were up 3 levels. They were well behaved. They had pride in who they were. Like they could, they say, I am a Saba king, and, this is what I stand for, and I have potential to be whatever I want to be. And to me, that was so crucial, because this is a piece that's missing, especially for boys, of not having that just deconstructed play, like just to be able to go out and play. That recess has been taken out of schools.
That's my my analogy for anxiety. It's like you started developing anxiety when they took recess away from you. They told you who you need to be, and that's when your hormones start, really.
That's right.
6th grade comes around, 5th grade's fun, 6th grade comes around, you go to this different school, usually, at least in California, that's when it starts. You start seeing girls differently, but then you don't have recess, you have in between, so all you have to do is talk and go to the next class. And then I feel like if more people, not everybody plays sports.
They removed it because of the fear of liability. And it's like the liability that you created by not having it is so much worse. It really is. Can be severe.
Taking those bulls and the wild stallions, and putting them in little tiny cubicles and making them shut it. That, it's like the art of standing up and learning how to stand up and talk, and then shut up and sit down. Yeah, and it's a wild. So, going through like pole vaulting and through your through many forms of movement and dance, what would you say that some of the maybe the different polarities and dynamics for movement, from like a clinical standpoint to where we need the recess and play again, like maybe the Eastern-Western blend?
Yeah, this is a topic that I adore. And we had a conference in Spain probably about 10 years ago that was just on play. And I got to be a keynote address on that. And it was like looking at different cultures' interpretation of their word and definition of play, right? So Chinese definition versus Greek versus Russian, all very different, very, very different. Like it was surprising to me as I was researching and preparing to give the keynote address. And what I realized was that it was about this concept of deconstructed activities that was so important. And if you leave children to their own devices, with other children, like the pack, like when cousins get together, even if there's 4 or 5 years difference between them, watching them socialize in their play, and again, I didn't know this as much when I was raising our children, but it's like for some reason, we were lucky that we always were squatting on the ground and we were always competing. We had a Pilates machine in the living room, and there were jokes about having this big trapeze table there and the kids doing pull-ups and swinging on it and push-through bars and pulling on the springs when they're 2, 3 years old, all the way up until, they all learned how to teach Pilates before they graduated from high school. So they had, a job that they could go to. And my point in bringing that up is like that movement exploration. If you would have asked any of them if they knew what Pilates was, they might have even said no. Mm-hmm. And yet here they were exploring, the most famous piece of Pilates equipment in their house from the time that they were born, that they were exploring this. And, we spent time on the ground trying to do things like push-up competitions and arm wrestling and pull-ups and, trying to get in contorted positions and yoga poses and those kind of things. And now they're all in their 30s. And I look at their bodies and I look at how they have been able to maintain that full squat. Like they all can go down to a full squat with heels down as adults. They all maintain a certain amount of mobility and a certain amount of strength. So it's like watching my youngest daughter, do some pretty competitive rock climbs in the rock climbing gym this week. And I was like, that was warming to me to mm-hmm. think of that she's still able to compete at that level. Or Nicole going through, she of course is a coach, but she also is still training and doing things for herself.
And all seeing how all of them transmuted it into their own version. I think that's right. That's real teaching, right?
Yeah.
The seeds are now turning into their own orchards.
And they all have a very high level of creativity from, music, art, writing. And I think that, those are all things that we don't fully understand the relationship between, the socialization of it, the exploration of their own body in it, the hierarchical levels of communicating in a pack. Mm-hmm. And you think of how you've built friendships in your jiu-jitsu training. Mm-hmm. And, you have sort of like a brother-sisterhood that has been developing of something that you guys know between yourselves. You think of the same thing possibly in the military or, a basketball team or a dance troupe, that there's a lot of things we don't understand still. I'll give you a good example of this. We had a research study that was done down in Southern California in Studio City at a Pilates studio. And a good friend of mine was the lead on this research study, and she's a falls expert. So the inclusion to get into the study is you had to have had a severe fall that took you to the hospital within the last 6 months. So these individuals came in and they participated in a Pilates reformer class twice a week for 12 weeks. Now to be in this study, you had to be high risk and high fear of falls. And the hypothesis on the study was that there would be no change, that these people would not have a change. And it was called what we call a null hypothesis. And following the 12 weeks, every one of them, all 93 of these subjects, came completely out of the risk of falls. And at 6 months post, they were still out of the risk of falls. Now, it'd be very easy for me to say, oh, Pilates is the magic. Mm-hmm. And I do think that something I'll talk a little bit more about is creating that successful movement experience is more important than the perfection of the movement, mm-hmm. right, for that individual. And that through their practice, they eventually will find the alignment and the ease and the efficiency of that movement. I think that the socialization of being with fellow risk of fallers that are having these successful movement experiences and the pack experience after the class of going like, can you believe that we were able to do that exercise today? And how are you feeling? Oh, I'm feeling really good. I feel like, I'm not afraid to take a step off a curb mm-hmm. anymore. And when they vocalize that or they share that or they agree with the person, there are neurological and social changes happening in that person. I really believe in the pack. And that's why a lot of times private training is refinement. but the pack training is the gold standard.
100%, and that's the sense of the blue zones, like, because people
That's right.
compare themselves to
That's
the
right.
blue zones, and they have community and more oxytocin than most of us.
That's right.
Also, they don't have the glyphosate and the weird ingredients that we have here, but yeah, I think that's huge too. Like when you're talking about, if you ask different cultures what their version of play is, a lot of those blue zones are going to probably have a similar version of play in their own.
Play could be going out and gardening.
Mm-hmm.
Play could be,
Or those late night
knitting,
dinners in
or,
Italy, you know.
right?
Yeah.
Or socializing around food,
Yeah.
super important.
Where you're grabbing friends
Yeah.
and neighbors off the street, you know, and
Yeah.
you're not just worried about the four of you in the
That's right.
family. And because even then it's so hard for them, like most Americans, to sit down and be able to have dinner together.
And even now, like we've been here for 2 weeks in Salt Lake City visiting the family, and Gabe, our son from North Carolina, also flew out, and so it's like we're all here, and we're all eating and breaking bread together, and we're playing games together, and we're building gingerbread houses together, and we're going on hikes together, and it's like those are the things that our society seems to take away from us, right? Because we tend to move away, and of course Lizette and I don't have that every day. So hence we live on a pretty large piece of property, and we now have, 2 huge Pyrenees dogs and 2 cute goats and 4 chickens. Actually, we lost a chicken 2 days ago. One of the Pyrenees got a hold of it.
Oh no, the pros and cons of big savage dogs.
Well, they're supposed to protect
Yeah.
them, but I don't think they're trained to protect the chickens. They take good care of the goats.
Yeah.
But I think that it's like I find myself looking forward to having that socialization even with our animals, right? Because it's just Lizette and I living in the house now. And being able to be here with the kids and the grandkids also, it probably, if you looked at my oxytocin levels, are so much higher. And, just even disclosing probably more than I need to, but some of the medication that I take for preventing heart disease is very depressing. So if you think of beta blockers basically going to block your adrenergic and your adrenal glands. And so I'm a adrenal junkie, right? So it's like I need it. And what I find is that, when I'm on that type of medication, you lose the motivation. Dopamine's not being released as frequently. It's hard to feel the drive. And I've never lacked that. Like that's something that's very, very new to me. And yet I find being around the family and in the pack that I'm not experiencing that level of lack of motivation or what you might call depression. And even though my level of, adrenaline is pretty high, it's much lower than where I normally would be. And so I'm really curious in the movement world of how important it is for, like, you think of Tai Chi in the park. You think of yoga practice up on the mountain. You think of these things that have been around for thousands of years, Qigong, breathing exercises, and how the culture brings it together for us to move together. And I think we're going to see more and more research, Justin, coming out that shows it's not, and I almost hate to say this because I spent so many years like defining, like perfect biomechanics and myofascial elasticity and the balance between the tensegrity model of tension and compression to have like this perfect human movement. And yet what I'm realizing is like, just go move.
Yep.
Just go play.
Get the river system
And
unblocked.
when you see somebody doing a clean and jerk in the gym and their knees are buckling, it's like, don't make them feel bad as the coach.
Yeah.
Because what naturally is going to happen is if they're having positive movement experiences, their alignment is going to naturally improve by human nature. Right? And you've seen this in your coaching.
100%.
Is like, just let them keep exploring. You didn't learn it overnight. I didn't learn it overnight. I had horrible form. I had horrible technique because I had no idea where that was supposed to take place in my body and space.
And then as soon as your technique was perfect, then you learn from somebody that's even more elevated.
That's
and you're
right.
like,
you always have somewhere to go.
what is pronation? And then you look at it that way, and anterior pelvic tilts and all these things, and you're like, no.
Do I need an arch lift? Do I need to strengthen the
Yeah.
arch of my foot? I need to get in a barefoot shoe. That's exactly the mindset. And this is the beauty of human nature. This is where if we can facilitate that successful experience in our children very young,
And that's it, making it fun again.
Making it fun again.
Because I grew up in a
because
very...
it's repetition.
Yep.
Right? And we see a lot of anxiety. I see it a lot in the kids of like their parents are trying to overcorrect to make a kid's going to learn how to read no matter what by the time they're 12 if they're given the right environment to learn how to read.
If you
So
can
if
give
they're
them
not
the,
reading at 4,
if you can
it's
give them the
okay.
importance, but also find what they're interested in,
That's
you know,
right.
and letting people develop into their own individuals.
Yeah.
Like, do you know, did you study or research like Miyoda Musashi at all?
No.
The Book of Five Rings, he was the samurai that beat 60 plus people and ended up being so good at sword fighting that he switched to using a wooden oar. Would still defeat everybody.
And he was still with
But what he talks about is the ideal warrior is the warrior in the garden. And what he says is like, you need to be the artist, you need to be the dancer, the calligraphist, the everything. But you have to have all that flow and play. And I think especially with like the amount of caffeine, the vaso restriction and all these things, like you're talking about Tai Chi and we're losing the metaphysical. We have 5G and all this other stuff. So like being able to get people back in touch with what their ancestors would be proud of, I think.
I love that idea. And even, you know, just thinking of what has to happen to be able to go do a manual garden or to, Lizette and I just built a shed for the goats, right? Because winter's here. And it was like learning how to, and neither of us, Lizette has architectural training late in life. And I was always told as a physical therapist that I could never use power tools because my hands were like my gold. And so my insurance policy says no chop saws, no table saws, no chainsaws, no tools. And now I'm sort of like, well, F that. I mean, I'm 62. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. So it's like it's play for us to go out there, set up a chop saw, explore what a nail gun feels like and compression, and to be able to build this shed or to build a chicken coop or those kind of things. And it's like having that same stimulation that I remember having as a teenager and a young adult, exploring, you know, some of these really intricate, challenging movement experiences. And that's why it's sort of like, if you can find somebody to have these movement experiences with, and this is where our role as coaches and therapists sometimes should be, of like helping people find, you know, almost minimal cost experiences that they can now participate in because they have this body awareness. So my goal is to help you discover the body awareness so that you really enjoy this activity.
Yeah, that's what I always say.
And then go do the activity.
Yeah, that's what I always say. It's like, it's not what I know, it's what your blueprint and you are going to be able to handle to do every day.
Right.
I could have the perfect workout plan for you, but that does not matter for the sake of your life.
That's
it's
so wise,
forging
Justin.
your own tools.
Yeah, that's so wise. And this goes back to that discussion we had earlier of, you know, how do I discover, you know, what it is that your body needs? And here's some good advice that might help some of the listeners out there that are coaches. I am a big fan of what's called the ICF model, the International Classification of Function and Disability model. It used to be in the olden days, everything was about handicap and disability, and we were trying to classify disability rather than classifying ability, right? And so in this model, Justin, the very center of it is the word activity, and just to the right of it is the word participation. And so what I want to discover as the coach or as the practitioner is, what do they believe, what activities do they believe they should be able to participate in? And that's the first question I have when I'm meeting a new client is, what do you believe you should be participating in now? And give them time to think about it, you know. And I have some, 80-year-old man that says, I want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and it's like, well, you've got 2 amputated legs. It might be a little tough, but I don't make that judgment call, right? And so what I'm doing is listening to them. And then that next question is not, what do you think prevents you from doing that? But do you believe that you could be able to participate in that activity? Because that's an alignment issue right there, right? And so then the next question, if they say no, is what do you believe is preventing you from participating in that? And so whatever it is, like it could be the grandparent that wants to get on the ground with their grandkids and be able to get up and down off the ground, right? Or it could be, I want to run a marathon, or I want to be an ultra athlete, or I want to do jujitsu, or I want to go skiing. Whatever that is that they believe and they create, all of a sudden creates the carrot, doesn't it? And now you as the practitioner, your brain just explodes. Like, oh, well, now we use some tests that we look at 4 or 5 movement tests that reflect that activity, right? And that's our specialty. That's what we have to know.
Assessments are huge.
We have to be able to do assessment. And it's so funny because I have a new course coming out called pathokinesiology. And basically the definition is any pathology or trauma that impairs your ability to move is my specialty. Right? And that would be the same, like what you're looking at doing would be the same thing. We want it for coaches, personal trainers, NASCM, different, wherever your training certification is.
Because it's all patterns, right? It's all
patterns. And we provide you with a whole battery of tests that you can use that would associate with the activity they want to participate in. And then we use our principles of movement from the book where we look at these 5 principles to say, is this just a coordination thing? Is this like novelty? You've never done it, and I'm your coach, and I'm going to help teach you how to do it. If you wanted to lift heavy weights, I'll teach you how to do a proper squat or a proper deadlift.
And that's my philosophy too. I was like, you could lift real strong and heavy, but what if we can just get the biomechanics understood? We'll make sure we'll do some movements to get those dopamine hits in between.
That's right.
The whole idea of like the more we learn about like the fascial and the crystalline structures in our bodies and like the release of like childhood traumas and things like that that are stuck in old injuries.
Yeah, absolutely.
That getting deeper and deeper into it.
Or they are the old injuries.
Yeah.
That emotional trauma.
Yeah, you see that. Like a lot of people, they release
a lot.
This creating strain.
And so I think that is such a great place for a trainer to start is just an assumption that, and you've seen this all the time, right? You see somebody that, their squat looks pretty challenged, right? And you say something like, what would happen if you just kept your knees over, in line with your second toe? What would happen? Oh, like this? Yeah, see what that feels like. Oh, that feels stronger. What would happen if you stick your butt out a little bit and see what that feels like? Or if you keep your chest in a better position, or if you feel the elasticity between the rib cage and the pubic bone in front, like not to contract the muscle, but just feel, be aware of that connection when you load up with that 35-pound barbell. That's all we're going to use.
It's like, what if I told you have a weight belt built in? It's called your transverse abdominis.
That's right. So then if I see that they cannot perform from the aspect of novelty or body awareness, then I might think of another principle of ours, which is control, right? So control has to do with control of load. So do I need to modify the load for you to have this experience? So this is where Pilates is so powerful, right? Because maybe they can't even squat with their body weight up against gravity, but maybe I can put them down on a table that has a closed chain representation for their feet and have the carriage moving out and back, just seeing if they even have the ability to, or I give them assistance, or they have, TRX band, or they have, springs or pulley systems that can provide assistance from above to see what their squat looks like if they have assistance.
And the different ranges for their core, up, down, left, right, diagonal, thoracic rotation, like from the bottom and the top hanging, it's all.
Yeah. And then if load modification doesn't make the difference, then I look at mobility. And this is where I might put a block underneath the heel because they don't have the ankle dorsiflexion to even allow it to happen. And this is where we see like lights go off, right? So you put a little block or a 2x4 underneath their heels, and all of a sudden they have full mobility of their knee and hips. They just didn't know that what they felt wasn't happening in their hips or their knee was because they didn't have dorsiflexion or they didn't have hip mobility.
And then that glute amnesia goes away and their quads aren't taking over.
All of a sudden, boom, it wakes up and they're like, I feel my ass. I feel it. It's like, this is great. And that's, again, any of those 4 things are creating these positive movement experiences. And that's what the coach's job is to do, because there's 2 parts to it. One is the business side of it. If you create positive movement experiences pretty quickly in your intervention, you're going to have somebody that trusts you that will come back and see the need to come back for more training. And then in our training, we're trying to create the level of independence, right? So we want people to be able to be internal locus of control, self-motivated, confidence in themselves to participate in these activities. And so we have this cycle going where we're encouraging, that's what coaching is, right? We're encouraging them to, you know what, I think you could walk on that curb all the way by yourself without having to hold on to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but my balance is like somebody that fear of falls. And you say, I'll tell you what, I'm going to put a thin piece of twine between here and there, and you can touch the twine, but you can't grab it. So now all of a sudden you've created a separate proprioceptive feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and they're able to do the walk on it. Forget about the fact that the twine wouldn't hold their body weight up. It was that they just did it successfully, right? And that is worth its weight in gold, you know. And then for them to be able to share that with somebody, or say, hey, can I take my therapist does this all the time. Let me get a video of you doing that, you know, because I came back from a pretty bad surgery in June. And I was preparing so I could go skiing this trip. Of course, nobody had snow that was worth skiing on this trip, so I'm going to have to come back in February. But my goal was to get my legs strong enough and my body awareness that I could get back on the slopes. And, you know, he would take videos of me doing things that were far more challenging than skiing down a blue run.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then he would send them to me. So when I look at the video, I'm going like, I can do this. I actually can, because I never thought I'd be able to ski again from some of the injuries. And now I'm thinking like, you know, I really think I could ski again, or I could potentially run again, or I could do some of these activities that I didn't believe I could do.
It might be hard, but it's almost fun once you get to it, and rewarding to be able to redevelop. Because then we get, like you were talking about, the identity crisis. We look at this old version of ourselves and realize that if it was that was not sustainable regardless. Yeah. And then you can redevelop. We call it like old man jujitsu or whatever you want to call that. It's like you have a more methodical, smooth way of doing things, and then you can recalibrate back into a new version, so it's safer.
Absolutely. And, you know, isn't that a beautiful gift? You know, we think of certain types of emotional behaviors that really make a difference in our life, and hope is one of those. So you've seen it where, you know, and when we talk about actual physiology and tissue adaptation, we think of this adaptation chart, which I'm sure you've seen, where you have the stress and endurance, and then you look at the tissue adaptation in the middle. Actually goes down this way. So higher intensity, shorter duration, we're going to hit a tissue adaptation load. If we don't hit the right amount of load, we don't have any change, right? If we go too far, this is always our dilemma as coaches. If we go too far, we actually create a little more damage than we wanted to, right? And when I say that, I always preface with my clients, and this is just something that everybody can use, is we're going to be exploring the first couple of weeks of your training for somebody new. And we're trying to find this area where you might have soreness for a day or two, which tells us we're in the zone. If you don't feel anything after this first session, we didn't hit the zone. If by some chance we go too far, because sometimes people are really motivated and they push themselves a little too far in the beginning, you might be sore for a week. And that's normal. It's not to be worried about. You're not doing harm to yourself, but that's not where we want to be. We want to be in the 1 to 2 day soreness after training to know that we're making a difference. So you put a positive experience. So people that are deconditioned, even a 2-day soreness could be scary to them, let alone a 7-day soreness.
Yeah.
They did way too much, right? But if you can take it away, and this is part of my job, like in our podcast that we're just going to release, my goal is remove fear, provide education, and show how movement can benefit this pathology or this trauma, and how we would stage it, how we would use movement as our therapy and our restoration to full participation in life. And I think that too often in both the medical and the fitness industry, we want to look smart. And so we often will catastrophize something that happens, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, you had the ACL tear and it's so bad. And, you know, I've known so many people that have never returned to the activity or they can't play football anymore. It's like, that's language that's harmful.
100%.
Right? and versus coming in and going, do you know how many people successfully return to their activities following these kind of injuries? Like 90%. You're in that 90%.
Exactly. Or
Right?
even, we're
So
going to
you're
make you
creating
that.
the hope,
Yeah.
and you're saying you just got to be patient. Like I saw somebody just the other day here by coincidence, and they know that I'm a physical therapist, and they're like, can you take a look at my hip? And it's like, I want to run this Ragnar, and I want to be able to run, 16 miles to be my part of this Ragnar event down in Southern California. And I said, yeah, let's take a look. So, my thought after just doing a quick evaluation is that she might have a small injury to her labrum of the hip, but no restriction in range of motion. It's just really with load. And I'm like, this is about letting something heal and letting it heal with alignment. So right now, the pain you're having is because the hip is pushing forward in the socket and putting pressure on that injury. And so it's like it's fighting itself. So let's just do a simple quadruped exercise, get the hip to sink back, feel the depth of the hip, and see what happens, right? So explaining to her that the cartilage of the labrum probably is going to take a couple months to get better by the nature of the tissue, and that she's going to have full recovery, and she doesn't have to go into this spinning zone of thinking, I'm 63 years old now, I can't participate in running anymore. I've always ran. I ski, I hike. And it's like, no, that's not what's happening. Your tissue's healing. We're going to give it a more optimal environment to heal, and you're going to get better. And it was like, just looking in her eyes, you could see the fact, like, so I don't have to worry about this. No, you just have to listen to your body and respect it. And over the next couple months and let it heal. It's going to take 3-4 months to fully heal.
So to talk on a modern scale, just so like for people, what are some of the for the listeners, because maybe some of the listeners might not get so deep in the weeds as we do, which I'm having a lot of fun here. But what are some of the what's the word I'm looking for? Common dysfunctions or common injuries that you see that you could see be prevented by certain movements. We can blend in
Absolutely.
Pilates and why everybody should find something that may help if people are just lost and they don't have a coach, they don't have.
I think it's such a great question, Justin. I think one of the key is to be educated, right? So when you look at the incidence of, let's say, just osteoarthritis, right? Well, I hate to tell you, but you've entered into the world of osteoarthritis now in your late 30s. And it's just a normal thing, right? So if I look at my skin as a 62-year-old, there are things where some of the elasticity is not there. You'll see some skin lesions and some aging marks and stuff like that.
You're saying your cells aren't reproducing at the same rate?
Well, yeah, exactly. And there's ways to be healthier about that. But the point being is that, after 20, we are hormonally, we are being programmed to start degeneration unless we prevent it, right? So we talk about bone health, we talk about joint health, we talk about myofascial health, we talk about heart health, we talk about fascial health, right, of being able to have load in your body that you can be an efficient human being moving through space and have elasticity and balance between compression and tension and all the different diagonals and dimensions of the body, which are fascinating. And so when you go to the doctor and you get an x-ray or an MRI and you're over the age of 30, they're probably going to find something. Just like if you looked in the mirror and you said, oh, you know what, my skin's not like it was when I was 16, right? There is change that happens. That change does not predict disease or pathology. I always like to be real clear with that. And so a lot of times, and I give you a perfect example. I had a patient in Miami just like in November is when I saw her. And she's 78 years old. She does Pilates and gyrotonic like 3 times a week, super active. And, at 78, if I do an x-ray of her, she's going to have pretty severe stenosis as an active adult. She's going to have some arthritic changes. That's going to be normal, like what we'd see in the x-ray. So she has an acute incidence of sciatic pain, so pain from the buttocks down to the back of her knee. She goes to a very well-known neurosurgeon in town, and he does an MRI, and he tells her she's a millimeter from being paralyzed in her leg. So she's freaked out, stops doing Pilates, stops doing gyro. I go down to Miami once a month, so she's waiting like 3 weeks to see me when she can see me there. And she comes in, and I look at her. All of her neuroscience are normal. So there's no major reflex problem. There's no major numbness or anything like that we would expect of having true stenosis compressing on a nerve root. And the reality was she was doing some gyrotonic exercises that were probably too aggressive for her at her age with her body type, right? And so she overextended and rotated and probably just pinched a nerve root. And so the nerve root itself goes through an inflammatory response, and you're going to have that irritation. But she didn't have any hard neuroscience. And so I said to her, you know what, this is what happens when, maybe you were a little overzealous in your gyrotonic session, and that's easy to do. It happens to me all the time. But the nerve root's going to heal. And what I would like you to do is, I have a neurosurgeon I want you to see that is not going to diagnose you off of your MRI, but he's going to potentially give you some relief with maybe an epidural or something like that that would just shrink the swelling down of that nerve that got pinched, and you'll be back to normal. She calls me up 4 hours after, Justin, and she says, I don't have any more pain. Well, what happened in those 4 hours? It was education.
Yeah.
It was like removing the fear.
Yeah.
And that phrase where the doctor said, you're a millimeter away from being paralyzed in that left leg.
Yeah, you help her cast a new spell on her cells.
It was a new spell.
Yeah.
And it was just being present with her, and literally, and I would have been honest, if I did reflexes and I saw that she was, not responding to reflexes and didn't respond to any of the neuro tests, I would say, I still would say first approach would be, let's get an epidural or something. Let's not talk, they wanted to do a 4-level fusion with her is what the doctor told her, and was planning on scheduling it a month out. And she said no. And I said, you're going to be able to return to all of your activities within a couple weeks after the epidural. And you're just going to have a little more body awareness and consciousness of going into too much extension, because you do have some bony restriction that could potentially pinch that nerve again. And the other thing is, if we can get a little more movement up in your rib cage and your chest and your hips, we can still achieve that beautiful extension in your body. It's just not going to happen at L4-5.
One of the most underutilized skill is spinal movements, I feel like,
Oh
too.
my gosh, yeah. We're filled with redundancy. We did this really cool study very early on with Pilates. We took a school, it was in Southern California at Mount St. Mary's, and we took the students, there were 40 of them, and we divided them up into 2 groups, and we had this cool machine that magnetically measured the displacement between the spinous processes. So what that means, we have 24 vertebrae, and we could take this wand, and we marked the skin points of the spinous process, and we could mark it, and it would take the measurement of the displacement, the space between the spinous processes. So then when you went into a forward bending, like putting your hands down on the floor, we could see how much displacement was happening by segment. So we could label every segment. And so we did the test multiple times for adaptation, and we came up with the conclusion that the majority of them had almost all of their movement in L4-5, L5-S1, almost nothing in the upper lumbar, and nothing detectable in the thoracic. So then we randomly assigned them to 2 groups, a rest group that just waited around 45 minutes on a treatment table, resting horizontally, brought them back, measured them again. And we had the other group go through 5 Pilates reformer exercises that they had never done Pilates before. So inclusion criteria was you never had back pain and you never did Pilates. Well, now, 30 years later, almost every one of my students has some kind of back pain, and they all know what Pilates is. But
This is the first time for me too. I've had a 6-month bulging disc or something in my neck, and just recently I started getting numbness here and here.
Yeah.
But the disc is feeling better, I think. But that was the
disc reduce with age. They're not going to get bigger
Yeah.
with age. They're going to reduce. So anyway, in this story, we looked at the control group, and they were exactly the same. So L4-5, L5-S1. And the experimental group, we measured again, and we saw 3 major changes. And 2 of them make a lot of sense. So we saw that the total range of motion of forward bending got better, which would make sense. In Pilates, we're doing, hip mobility and hamstring mobility and spine articulation and bridging in those 5 exercises. And they literally had, a significant change in the range of motion. We also saw a significant increase in the upper lumbar and in the thoracic. So we saw that there were more segments, average of 3 or 4 more segments, that were participating in the strategy of forward bending, right? And then the most important one was that L4-5, L5-S1 reduced by 50%. So that was a real big discovery, and that's where we came up with the phrase distribution of movement equals distribution of force. That's like you're saying the underutilization of the spine. If you have 24 motion segments and you choose to use 2 or 3, the amount of load, if you're really active in those 2 or 3 segments, is going to be really high. And you'd see the same thing, cervical 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6. Those would be the most active ones where we see the most injuries, right? But if we can increase thoracic mobility in the chest, we can take a huge load off of cervical and a huge load off of lumbar. And what we realized was in Pilates, that's exactly what we were doing. We were shifting strategy almost immediately. It wasn't like you had joint restrictions. You just didn't have strategy for it. And so that was a big discovery of thinking like, we create these positive movement experiences. We allow them to explore what their body naturally has, but maybe they don't have access to. And then we see how that change manifests, right? And so you could imagine why we were seeing so many people have so much success with Pilates with low back pain was because in 2 or 3 sessions, we changed the strategy from putting, if I could reduce the flexion stress on that disc by 50% in 1 session, you're going to get better.
Right. And then teach the body how to adapt and maintain it.
Yeah. And then you go into function and say, so what do you want to participate in? Let's recreate that with a more distributed motion option and improve the strategy. And that's what we teach as coaches. And that's why for me, like as a physical therapist and a Pilates teacher, I might see my patient once or twice a month, but they're seeing my Pilates teachers who are the best movement teachers 2-3 times a week in a group class.
It's so hard too, because like people just, it's as coaches, I feel like instead of telling everybody, he's doing, like we were talking about, he's doing this wrong, she's doing this wrong. It's so confusing for other people. It's like, and that's why I try to get away from the wrong or right. And I'm like, well, your body needs some of this too. Like I don't disagree with macros and bodybuilding. If that's what gets you in the gym to start with, start there.
Yeah.
We all have to start somewhere, but to say everybody's wrong or right, and you can see the difference.
I appreciate you saying that.
You know what
so
I mean?
Much.
Like, because then everybody's just had like this weird tribalism. Everybody's stuck.
And I can tell you too, Justin, that faulty alignment does not correlate with injury. Like we have to get that out of our head. Right? It could have a relationship, based on an overload of, that tissue in that sort of funky alignment. But you can't say that somebody that has, pronation in their feet is going to have this problem with running a marathon. And if you look at some of the world's best marathoners, they have anomalies in their feet and their bodies, but they, you watch them run and you're just like, salivating.
Yeah.
You're looking at, they're floating for 23, 30 miles. Like, it's just amazing.
Yeah, one of my clients is an ultra marathon runner. He's in his 70s. But then again, too, for him, he has some structural defects that are happening, But, But that's also, right, you might not, but if it goes unaddressed for way too long, too. But, life doesn't just throw you bench press. You have to be in weird positions.
Yeah, that's right. And the more you explore, that's where... the things we were talking about with Ido Portal, Roy Gold, with Animal Flow, and you look at how we can move through the knee motion into these rotations and abductions and adductions, and and it's like injury is going to occur at an end of range, right? And so in medicine we talk about a neutral zone, and so for high performers, if I can push that neutral zone out 80% of the total range of motion, I'm going to have my Cirque du Soleil perform. I'm going to have my best jiu-jitsu, able to escape some of the holds, because they're able to have control in a larger part of that neutral zone.
And that's why I tell people, it's like, it's not right or wrong, but barbell bench press was created for individuals that had a barbell first. Like one of the reasons why a lot of people didn't have access to dumbbells,
right.
they're not a football player.
That's
We don't
right.
need to worry about your push,
Yeah.
unless you are,
Yeah.
if that's what you want to do. And
Yeah,
it's,
that was true with like women coming into military
Yeah.
and law enforcement, firefighting was like, do you really do that many pull-ups?
Yeah.
Is that, or do I need somebody that's smarter, that has good,
Yeah.
maybe gun
what's-
handling,
what's
communication
practical
skills
to your life?
Exactly.
And
it was
what's fun.
These were old things that were brought up in physical fitness in the
Yeah.
50s.
But people
with
are
Jack
like,
LaLanne that
the
don't really
trap bar
correlate.
deadlifting. They're like, well, trap bar, that's not a real deadlift. I was like, it wasn't created when the barbell was created. That's like being like, well, it's not a Model T. Why are you driving around your modern day car? It's
We
like,
deal with that all the time. Classical Pilates and modern is like, I have to be on this old machine with old wheels, with old spring adjustments, with don't accommodate anybody, versus something that allows me to work with a much larger population, because of modern technology.
100%.
And it's exactly
Yeah,
that.
but then again, all of us have had that. Our
Yes.
egos in there. Like I'm sure that you see, you have a pair of skis that you probably love, and they have this new whatever that is. We all have that. I catch myself. I'll even nowadays too. I'll go out of my way to walk up to somebody that I think annoys me with their form, but I'll be like, "Hey, great job." You're in here. You're not on the couch doing
proud of you,
potato chip
Justin.
curls. You know what I mean? Like, it's coming from a fighter to being a fighter and all that stuff too. That's a real pecking order of things. So you're not this big bodybuilder thing in a public gym, but
We just have to believe in the process of human nature, that when we stick to something long enough, our body naturally seeks efficiency.
Yep.
And this is where some of our coaching interferes with that natural ability. Like if we're telling people you have to have, this strength here to do that. It's like, well, actually we don't.
yeah,
We have to have the functionality that can handle that load in that orientation of that activity we want to participate in. That activity is going to be better training.
you're always going to find science too, backed by certain individuals and certain things. It's like the cold water plunge, this, that, and the other. It's like, well, who's saying it's bad? People that don't like it? Because then, of course, you're going to be able to find stuff that's deeper into that, right? So it's all, you got to be careful on studies too
I
sometimes.
agree.
It's all, who's it funded by? Was that funded by Big Sugar? Was that funded by,
That's right.
a bodybuilding?
Oh my gosh. Don't go there.
I know.
Don't go there, Justin.
Yeah,
That's
but
that's another one.
yeah, no, this has been a fun one for me because I like hearing people's origin story. Maybe we'll have you back on too, so we can go through some of that as well. But yeah, this one was, I feel like this is one of those podcast hosts for me too. Like all of them are fun to learn, but I was like, this one is definitely a subject I can geek out on. And then, so what we'll do for now, we can go many directions, but what we'll do is you can do anywhere from 3 to 5 words of advice, whether it comes to movement or whatever comes to mind, for our clients. I'm already saying it. The guests and listeners today, and then you can look into that camera over there and just whether it's metaphysical or it's spiritual advice, whatever comes to your heart, man.
Yeah, I wake up in the morning and I think, bring the world physical, emotional, and spiritual alignment. That's where I live.
That's where you live?
And if I added anything to it is, as trainers, as teachers, as therapists, create the positive movement experience. And, trust that the patient or the client is going to be the one that knows what they need, and take the time to listen to them.
100%. It all helps with being more present, right?
Yeah.
Can't always trust this. Sometimes you have to trust this in this too.
Yeah, we joke about it, but it's like, we all have our own crap in our life. When you walk into the space that you're going to be the provider for somebody else, leave all your crap outside. And a simple way to do that is, I'm okay, and I'm going to do good. Because you're going to think about that other person. And it's amazing how well it works to compartmentalize. Like I see a lot of trainers using their clients as their psychologist, and talking, they're maybe wealthier, maybe wiser, and they're using them during their time to deal with the trainer's problems. And it's like, avoid doing that.
Yeah.
As much as you can. There might be a time that person can really give you some insight, but during their time when they're coming to work with you, be okay.
And it's a combination too of like teaching and learning from them, like the student and the teacher.
Yeah. And that's, if you want to go into a mentor relationship of life, it's like, then that should happen off piste. You know what I'm saying? It's like, go meet for, a tea, or, have dinner together, invite each other over. That is an agreed upon mentoring between the two of you. When they come and pay us to provide the coaching or the mentoring or the training, embody that for them and listen to them. And, I see it a lot. It's probably one of my pet peeves in my profession, is seeing somebody come to a physical therapist and the physical therapist is complaining about all their problems to their patient. It's like, that's not the right place. Be the healer, listen, be present for your clients.
100%. And for yourself too.
Yeah. Oh, and how do you feel after, 5-6 hours of being present for other people, helping them? Like, that is joy.
It is.
It should be joy for you.
It should.
That's how you know you're in the right profession.
Yeah.
That should be joy, because you didn't have to worry about a single thing for 6 hours. You were just present.
That's why I love stuff like this. It's like there's no outside interference.
I agree.
Just two people talking.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks so much. I'd love to have
Good
you on
luck
again next time
with
you're
everything. You're so right on the money with the direction you're going.
I'm working on it, man. I appreciate it. You inspire me a lot too. So this, I got chills. I'm like, man, I needed this one too, because sometimes you get lost in your own weeds, man. If you
Absolutely,
it's so easy to go opposite directions of where movement needs to go. But in closing, just remember, don't train like concrete. Be more pliable and strong like bamboo. Flow like water. Get out of our minds and into our hearts. Have a great day, everybody, and thanks for listening. Once again, thank you, Dr. Brent.
Thank you, Justin.